The 2010 federal court case in Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission opened the door for corporations and labor unions to exert a greater influence on elections. It showed that limiting the campaign contributions that individuals can make is in violation of the First Amendment's protection of free speech. These two rulings have created conditions that allow businesses, unions, and wealthy donors to have greater influence in the country's election process. Prior to 2010, campaign finance laws capped a $5,000 contribution that an individual could make to a group that spent money to influence on an election, through donations to a candidate, for instance, called a political action committee. These organizations can be run by a corporation, union, membership organization, or trade association. Money raised for the 2016 presidential Trump-Hillary campaign grew to over $2.3 billion. Over $284 million were donated by super PACs alone.
Clinton's campaign received 16% of its money in donations of $200 or less. Trump's campaign received 26% of its funds from small donations. Of the $2.4 billion donated to support Democratic and Republican candidates, 10 to 13% was raised by super PACs and other independent groups. Campaign finance reform began in the 1970s, and it is a political effort in the United States to change the involvement of money in politics, especially in political campaigns. Campaign finances were finally regulated, and this became the first successful attempt to do so. Under-the-table deals are occurring frequently, and there has been zero proof of where the money is coming from and for who.
Campaign finance reform began in the 1970s and is a political effort in the United States to change the involvement of money in politics, especially in political campaigns. Campaign finances were finally regulated, and this became the first successful attempt to do so. Under-the-table deals are occurring frequently, and there has been zero proof of where the money is coming from and for who.
The Federal Election Campaign Act, FACA, of 1972 required all candidates to make the source known of campaign contributors or expenditures. FAC put a cap on a candidate's spending by limiting donations from $1,000 to $5,000 by PACs. This is when they amended the introduction of limits on contributions in 1974. These specific election donations are also known as hard money. The 2010 federal court case in Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission case, in which the court ruled that super PACs were allowed to pay for media that mentioned any candidate in periods immediately preceding elections. It was stated that it was their right in the First Amendment for free speech. Prior to this, there were restrictions placed on super PACs that they could spend their money preceding an election.
Many people disagree with the Supreme Court's decision to change this law, but it was still put into action. Certain candidates received money for their political parties from money that is raised through fundings from political action committees, party and joint fundraising, and from their campaigns themselves. PACs cannot actually have direct contact with that candidate they are donating to. Super PACs and big corporations spend billions influencing America's government. We give them trillions in return. In the last 5 years alone, the 200 most politically active companies in the U.S. spent $5.8 billion influencing our government with lobbying and campaign contributions. These same companies got $4.4 trillion in taxpayer support, earning a return of 750 times their investment.
It's a vicious cycle of legalized corruption. As the cost of winning an election explodes, politicians of both political parties become ever more dependent on the tiny slice of the population who can bankroll their campaigns. To win a Senate seat in 2014, candidates had to raise $14,351 every single day. Just 0.5% of Americans donate more than $10,000 in any election. So it's perfectly clear who candidates will turn to first and who they're obligated to when they win.
In return for campaign donations, elected officials pass laws that are good for their mega donors and bad for the rest of us. Our elected officials spend 30 to 70% of their time in office fundraising for the next election. When they're not fundraising, they have no choice but to make sure the laws they pass keep their major donors happy, or they won't be able to run in the next election. Until it's addressed, corruption will continue to block progress on every issue.
Because the 1%, or more specifically known as the richest people / corporation owners in the world, continue to control our government, even without our knowledge, the average person's voice is only getting smaller.
A solution to the problem is that we suggest that all candidates can only accept a certain amount of money before exceeding their money cap. We believe a reasonable money cap is $400 million per candidate in their final election, from overall donations, super PACs, individuals, fundraising, etc. Any money that was accepted after reaching its money cap will not be used in candidates' run for election, but used as subsidies towards charity, donations, or so forth. In addition to this, all candidates must continue to report who they are getting their money from and how much. To make sure no candidate is breaking the rules by receiving money under the table, they must report where they plan on spending the money that they get beforehand, kind of like a set plan, and if not reported, will be disqualified in the candidate election and punished by the U.S. government for money laundering. And finally, all candidates will have a cutoff date where they may not accept any more money given to them within the final months prior to the election. The candidates must use the money they have received before this deadline. All other money not used or donated afterhand will be donated to a non-profit organization / charity under the government's rule.